So, welcome all the participants in this Thursday afternoon session. Here, Dr. Himanshu Padole is with us. He is assistant professor in Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering at IIT Bhubaneswar. He received the prestigious Prime Minister's Research Fellowship in PhD at IIT Delhi. He received the distinction in Doctoral Research Award in PhD at IIT Delhi. He received an excellent grade for the overall performance in PhD and got selected for the National PMRF, a conventional organized by Ministry of Education, Government of India. He ranked third in the MTech Communication Engineering at IIT Delhi. He ranked second in the Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering BTech at VNIT Nagpur. He received Academic Excellence Award for securing first rank in BTech in first year at VNIT. He qualified the GATE exam in Electronics Communication 2014 with 92 point percentile, All India rank 168. He regarding his basically research interest, he is working in biomedical signal processing, speech signal processing, and applied machine learning. He is right now working upon basically the he has a experience of 7 research and consultancy projects, including prediction of task activation maps from RS-fMRI and structural MRI to enhance clinical applicability of fMRI given by the DHT. Optimization of algorithm for voice analysis system for defense applications. Prediction of task fMRI activation map from resting state fMRI and structural MRI. This project given by the IIT Bhubaneswar. Development and validation of wearable device to detect the motor fluctuations in patients with Parkinson's disease. The human-animal conflict mitigation system deployed in the Tadoba Andheri Tiger Reserve Consultancy. Development of AI-based radar jamming technique. Here basically around the 10 general papers in the reputed journal as well as the many papers in the international conferences. He has received the DSP Travel Grant Award to young scientists for attending the international conference in Switzerland. He has to the long list, and apart from it, I interacted with Dr. Himanshu during my PhD tenure when he had been doing at the IIT that our supervisors are the same, Professor S.D. Joshi, and there I found the chance to meet Himanshu. Without taking more time, I invite him with uh, such a wonderful experience to share his insights to our participants, the image pro. Welcome, Dr. Himanshu.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Hemant Kumar Meena for inviting me here and providing me the opportunity to present my work here in the FDP, which is on basics of image processing with applications. And it's my honor to have a part of this FDP, where my supervisor, Professor S.D. Joshi, is also the speaker, and along with that, many eminent personalities like Professor Vikram Gadre, Professor Ramvilas Pachuri, and so on. So it's really an honor for me. And once again, I thank Dr. Meena for inviting me here. Uh, So, I'll be having my today's talk on the topic enhancing clinical applicability of fMRI using resting state to task activation map prediction. Uh, so, the outline of today's talk will be like this. It will start with the introduction to the problem statement. Why do we care about that? What is the motivation behind that? Followed by what are all the existing works which try to solve the problem that we intend to solve here. So it will be basically the brief overview of the existing work. Then we'll see what are the lacunas or the research gaps that can be addressed to improve the accuracy further. Followed by that, we'll be discussing in detail about the proposed methodology, which tries to overcome the limitations of the existing work. It will be followed by the results, key observation, and the conclusions. And finally, we'll look at the future scope in which the presented work can be extended. Uh, Before I start, am I audible? Uh, yeah, thank you. Thank you for confirming. And I think my slides are also visible. Yeah. So in between, if I lose the connection or if the slides are not visible, you can please let me know. So starting with the introduction, because the topic or the title of the talk may not look very familiar. Okay? So I spend some time on explaining the basic idea of the problem that we are going to discuss here and what is the motivation behind choosing this particular problem. So, uh, in the title itself, we can see what we ultimately want is to enhance the clinical applicability of the fMRI, wherein we try to predict the activation map, task activation map from the resting state fMRI. But to appreciate the problem better, we require some basic background about what is fMRI, what is resting state fMRI, task fMRI, activation map, and so on. So, because for most of us, these terminologies may not be very familiar, so I'll be giving you very basic idea of what all these basically imply. So, fMRI stands for the functional magnetic resonance imaging, and it conceptually it is quite similar to more commonly used modality, that is MRI. But when it comes to the application, the both differ quite significantly. In MRI, our intention is to get the static structural view of the organ that we are scanning. For example, if we are taking the MRI of the brain, what we intend is to get the static structural view of the brain. Whereas when it comes to functional MRI or called as fMRI, it's basically acquired to to see which part of the brain is particularly responsible for a given task or given function of the brain. For example, here we can see in the picture uh, when someone is performing a visual task. For example, this cross here is shown to a person for some time, let's say 2 seconds. Then the screen goes blank. Then again for 2 seconds, the cross is shown, and so on. So this is some sort of a visual activity. And what we want here is that when someone is performing a visual task, which area of the brain is particularly getting activated. So this is the basic motivation behind the functional MRI. Basically, we try to figure out what are the different parts of the brain which are responsible for particular functioning of the brain. So, although the concept of acquisition is almost the same in both MRI and the fMRI, their motivations are quite different. Uh, Now, depending on how we actually acquire the fMRI, it's broadly categorized into two types. The first is resting state fMRI, where the second is called the task-based fMRI. And what we discussed just now was the example of task-based fMRI. So, basically, in the task-based fMRI, one has to go inside the MRI scanner, and a certain predefined task needs to be performed by the subject. For example, here the example shown was of the visual task. Similarly, sometimes let's say if we want to identify the area responsible for the auditory functioning, one may has to listen to certain song for when he or she is inside a scanner. And let's say when we listen to a particular song, the particular part of the brain will get more activated as compared to other, and that is what we exactly try to capture in the task based fMRI. So and the basic working principle behind this is that when a certain task is being performed by the brain, the part responsible for functioning of that task requires more energy, which is basically drawn by increasing the blood flow to that part of the region. And that phenomena is captured by the functional MRI. Basically, it tries to analyze the signal, bold signals acquired during the particular performance of a task, and whenever the bold signal gets correlated with the task pattern, we say that the particular area is responsible for that given task. So this is the basic physics principle behind the functional MRI, particularly the task-based functional MRI. So basically, it tries to analyze the variation in the bold signal, and whenever the variations in the bold signal are highly correlated with the task patterns, we say that the given area is responsible for the given task, and that is typically represented as the activation maps. So this is a simple example of how the activation maps look. So this is a simple visualization of a brain, and this red portion is the activated region of the brain when a particular task is being performed inside a scanner. So the image shown here corresponds to the working memory task. So basically these regions, the bold signals in these regions are highly correlated with the task that was being performed, and hence it's marked in red. So this representation is called activation maps. Uh, the second type of fMRI is called resting state fMRI, wherein we do not perform any explicit task when we are inside a scanner. So it's like we are simply resting inside a scanner, and hence called the resting state fMRI. Although virtually it may look useless, okay, because we are not performing any tasks, so we are not acquiring the information about any particular task or a function of the brain. But when we are even in the resting state, multiple brain regions form the connection between themselves, and that information is quite useful and also unique to a particular subject. For example, when a subject A is whenever let's say we are taking the resting state fMRI of a subject A, and let's say we take the resting state fMRI of a subject B, then the resting state activation patterns are unique for subject A. It's different for subject B also. So basically, it gives us some sort of intrinsic representation, some sort of representation of the intrinsic brain activity. And in fact, uh, this is the principle that we are going to use in our further hypothesis. Basically, resting state fMRI gives us some sort of unique characterization of a given subject or a given person, and that information we try to use as an input to predict the activation map for a given subject. Now, before we go to the actual problem statement, uh, let's try to understand in the brief why we are interested in all this. Okay, where all these resting state or let's say task fMRI, all these image modalities are used. Okay, most of us are familiar with the magnetic resonance imaging (MRI), but most of us may not have used this functional MRI. So, the main application of functional MRI, as discussed initially, is to identify the region responsible for a particular function of the brain. So, for example, let's say someone has a tumor in the brain, let's say towards the back side of the brain in the occipital lobe. So, when the tumor is identified, obviously the next step is to remove that tumor by the surgery. But if we simply remove the entire tumor, the person may go blind because the same area is also responsible to perform the visual activities. So, what is typically done is that we have to have a trade off that we want to remove the tumor, also we want to preserve the visual activity of the person. So, the most efficient way is to first perform the functional MRI, by which we can precisely identify what is the core region of the brain which is responsible for the visual activity for a given subject. So, inside a scanner, we typically perform the visual tasks. Okay, one of the example is shown here in this figure. So, like that, multiple visual tasks are performed by the subject, which gets us this kind of representation of the brain called represented in the form of the activation map. And once this activation map is known, now we precisely know the most core region responsible for the visual abilities of a given person. Then, in that case, although if there is a tumor in that region, we try to avoid touching that portion of the brain. So, this kind of application is very common when it comes to pre-surgical planning in okay, and fMRI is widely used in such cases. The second is in case of okay, there are certain diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, like for example Alzheimer's disease, where the disease progresses over the time, and there is no cure as such for such kind of diseases. But what we want is to analyze the effect of drugs or medicine that are given to such a patient. So, typically, in case of such neurodegenerative diseases, the brain functioning is the networks in the brain gets altered, which results in the disease. So, what we want to test is that whether the medicine is able to control the disruption in the network pattern or the connectivity pattern of the brain, and that is exactly can be that exactly can be monitored by observing the activation maps over different time duration. So we know what should be the typical activation map for a given task in the healthy subject. Similarly, we know what is the activation map for the patient that we are monitoring or observing. So, what we try to observe through this is whether the pattern is getting worsened or it's remaining closer to the healthy one. So, that is another application where the activation maps and the fMRI are extensively used. So it's basically uh, helps us in monitoring the progress of the disease and also to suggest what are the best medicine for the given subject. Similarly, it's extensively used as the biomarkers for the neurological disorders like autism spectrum disorder, Alzheimer's, and so on. The last one is again for classifying or identifying the diseases like ADHD, schizophrenia, and so on. So mostly it's means all this is used in either identifying the precise location of the brain region or monitoring and identification of different neurological disorders. So now, if we look at all of these applications, typically all of this involves the task-based fMRI. Okay. And in fact, this is the reason why, although potentially the fMRI looks quite useful, in practice, at least till time, it's not widely used. In fact, many of us may not have even encountered the functional MRI ever. Whereas when it comes to MRI, all of us at least have some experience of the MRI. And the reason is that most of these applications require the task fMRI. And when it comes to task fMRI, the acquisition is the main problem. Uh, just a minute. Yeah. Now, when it comes to the acquisition of task fMRI, the acquisition, as explained earlier, typically involves a subject uh, which has to the subject who has to perform certain tasks or predefined tests inside a scanner. And if we have experienced the scanning in normal MRI also, there is lot of noise inside the scanner, and it's difficult even to remain at rest inside a scanner. And when it comes to task fMRI, the subject has to perform a given predefined task or a test, and that too very precisely. And that creates a problem. In fact, that is the one of the biggest challenges in the acquisition of task fMRI. So many a times there is a human error in the task performance, and once there is some error in the task performance, the entire scan has to be repeated. So the repetition of scanning is costly. It's again time consuming, and another disadvantage or limitation we can say is that we require the skilled professional which can who can observe that whether the given task, predefined task, is performed precisely or not. Okay, so that requires the availability of the skilled professional or doctor. And also this observation is quite subjective. Someone may say that the task is performed precisely, while for the same task the some other doctor may say it's not up to the mark. So it's quite subjective, and also requires the availability of the skilled professional or a doctor. So it's time consuming, it's costly, it's prone to human error, and also requires the availability of the skilled professional. So now all of these are the general limitations in the acquiring the task fMRI. Whereas although these are the limitations, these can be you can say overcome if we have sufficient, let's say, time, if the cost is not constrained, if we have the availability of the skilled professional, all of these limitations can be overcome. But when it comes to, let's say, we are dealing with the subjects, non-compliant subjects, like say infants, or let's say older subject, paralyzed subjects, or the subjects who have the physical or the mental disability, then for such subjects, we do not have the option where a subject can perform the task precisely. For example, if we want to have the fMRI of the infants, we cannot instruct the infants to perform a particular task. Or let's say for the paralyzed subject, the subject cannot perform the given task. Let's say if it is a motor task, he or she cannot perform a given task precisely. And that creates the problem. If the task cannot be performed, the resulting task fMRI would not be accurate. So all of these typically pose themselves as the practical challenge, okay, in the task fMRI activation. And in fact, that is the reason why we do not usually see the fMRI in the clinical application widely. Now, all of these limitations can be somehow avoided if we can only work with the resting state fMRI, because when it comes to resting state fMRI, no task, no explicit task is required to be performed inside a scanner. So there are less chances of human error. So it also avoids the repetition, resulting in the lesser time and cost. Also, because there is no explicit task to be performed or monitored, the availability of skilled professional is also not that mandatory. When it comes to the non-compliant subjects, it's even more beneficial because they cannot perform the given task, but at least they can remain in a resting state inside a scanner. And if that can be sufficient, it can be also extended for such non-compliant subjects. So this forms the basic motivation behind the problem statement that we try to solve here. That formally, what we want in this work is to predict the task activation maps, which are typically obtained using the task fMRI, using only the resting state fMRI, which does not involve any task as such. So, what we want is something like this, that we want to generate these kind of task activation map, but without actually performing that task. Only from the resting state fMRI, we want to predict what would have been the task activation map if a given task was performed. So that is in brief or basic motivation or the objective in this particular work. Similarly, once we achieve this task activation map generation, we want to extend the work for evaluation of different human trait values like IQ prediction and so on. Again, which typically requires certain explicit tasks or tests. So if we are able to generate the task activation map without any task, all of those scores also can be generated only from the resting state fMRI, requiring no explicit tasks or tests. But at least in this presentation, we'll be focusing on the first problem statement, okay, where we want to generate the task activation maps using only the resting state data. Uh, Now, before I start with the proposed methodology, just a brief background of what has been done till now and what are the advantages, disadvantages of the existing work, the existing work. So, all of this started with the first paper listed here. The task-free MRI predicts individual differences in brain activity during task performance. So this is a 2016 paper by Tagore, where for the first time they proved the possibility of task activation map prediction from the resting state fMRI itself. So here, basically, they identified the similarity between the functional connectivity maps and the activation maps. So, by observing the similarity between the intended activation maps and the functional connectivity maps, they tried to learn the generalized linear regression model, which maps the functional connectivity to the required activation maps. So basically, they trained the generalized linear regression model for which the input was the functional connectivity maps generated from the resting state data, fMRI data itself. And also they use some structural MRI features uh, during the regression process. Now, based on this seminal work, several extension for the same were proposed, where basically the features remain the same, which are again the functional connectivity maps, but different kind of sophisticated regression algorithms were tried out. For example, in paper 5, Apart from the linear regressors, neural network, random forest were tried on the same set of features. Similarly, in paper 7, SARP CNN was tried uh, in some other works, lasso, linear, and graph neural networks are tried. So basically, in all of this work, one common thing we can see is that all of them try to learn the regressors from the functional connectivity maps. Okay, and that in fact poses as the limitation of all of the existing work. So, because the functional connectivity maps are basically heuristically derived connectivity maps, which basically gives us the relational information between different brain parts of parts by observing the correlation between their resting state fMRI bolt signals. Okay. So although visually those are quite similar to the activation maps, as such, it's not the fact that those are only the optimal features for the activation map prediction. So all of these functional connectivity maps are heuristically derived feature. And the second major limitation with these kind of features are that they are basically the correlation between the different brain regions. So they only provide us the relational information from the resting state fMRI. Whereas if we look at the resting state fMRI, okay, those are the scans acquired over the time inside the MRI scanner. So all of those resting state fMRI are basically the multi-dimensional time series. And when it comes to the functional connectivity maps, those are only the relational features which encode the static relational information between different brain parts. So when we are constraining ourselves to the functional connectivity as the features, we are losing the potentially useful intrinsic temporal information of the resting state fMRI. Because when taking the correlation, the temporal information in the time series is lost. So that is one of the major drawbacks of all the existing method, which are only restricting themselves to the functional connectivity maps and neglecting the useful temporal information of the resting state fMRI. The second common limitation or drawback that we can observe is that all of the existing methods try to learn the common mapping for a group of gray ordinates, which is typically formed using the brain parcels. So, a common model is used to predict the activation maps for the entire parcel. But in reality, different gray ordinates or different brain parts can have the different optimal mapping between their feature set and the actual value. So this subtle variation in the gray ordinate mappings is lost if we are learning a common map for the entire brain region, uh, which is typically the case with the existing methods. The third limitation we can observe is that once the regression model is selected, it's used for the prediction of entire activation map of the entire brain surface. Okay. So again, we are using a universal regression model for the entire brain, which may not be optimal for different brain regions, okay, or which are characterized in terms of gray ordinates. So again, we are forcing some sort of one fit for all approach, okay, when we are coming to the feature set or when it comes to the regression model. So all the existing methods try to force the common feature set and the common regression model for entire brain, okay, which may not be optimal solution. And the last limitation is that because the existing works are not at all considering the temporal information, they are able to exploit only the spatial information. So there is no way to capture both the spatial and the temporal information from the resting state fMRI. So, by observing the limitations of the existing work, to overcome all those, we proposed here the activation map prediction model by introducing a novel perspective where the task activation map is formed as the time series regression problem. So basically, we consider the resting state fMRI as multi-dimensional time series and then consider the activation map prediction problem as the time series regression problem. Uh, this fundamentally separates us from the existing approaches, which are basically neglecting the temporal information, whereas in the proposed approach, we are explicitly exploiting the temporal information through the time series regression analysis. Uh, Once we formulate the problem as a time series regression, we also propose a novel histogram-based approach for the time series regression, wherein for the first time we are exploiting the histograms, windowed histograms, as a feature for the time series regression analysis. All of the details about all of this will be discussed in the subsequent slides. This is just the brief overview of what has been done in the proposed work. Then the next contribution is in terms of modeling, where we formulate the regression problem as a gray ordinate wise regression, where we basically design all the 59412 independent models which predicts the activation value for the given gray ordinate. So, unlike the existing methods, which try to learn the common model for the entire brain region or the entire cortex, we here design the customized model, where each model works only for the given gray ordinate. So, basically, it tries to have the more optimized mapping for every gray ordinate. And finally, once we have different models for every gray ordinate prediction, in the last step, we try to form the ensemble based prediction approach, where we combine the best of the existing mappings, okay, so that overall accuracy in the task activation map prediction is enhanced. So basically, we first try to get the activation maps using different feature sets and different regressor, and once we have the predictions using different regressors and feature sets, we try to combine the best among the predicted values to have the overall accuracy better than the individual predictions. So this we have named as the GEMREG, which stands for Gray Ordinate Ensemble Modeling for Regression. So all of this basically summarizes what we have done in the present work, and now one by one I'll be going into details of each of this. So now this figure gives us the overview of what has been proposed, which is basically the overall pipeline to obtain the activation map prediction using time series regression. So here, as we can see, the first part is the pre-processing, where basically we extract the time series from the raw fMRI data. Once we have the gray-ordinated time series after the pre-processing, we obtain its different representations like raw time series, its first order difference and the second order difference. Now, from these diverse representations, we generate or extract different kinds of features like histogram, catch-22, summary, and so on. We also tried other features also, which will be presenting in the ablation study. But amongst the all, these three were found to be the optimal and hence were used in the further analysis. So from each representation of the time series, we extract these three kinds of feature, and then this features are provided to different standard regressors like lasso, linear regressor, SVR, XGBoost, and so on. So these each of these regressor and the feature set basically generate the activation map predictions, and then we look at the accuracy of the predictions using different feature sets and the different regressors. Uh, Here, as we can see, we are looking at one time series at a time and then predicting its corresponding gray ordinate activation map value. So basically, to obtain the entire prediction of 59,412 uh, gray ordinates, we are basically learning individual 59,412 different prediction models, and that basically enhances the overall prediction capability, because we are optimizing the predictions of every gray ordinate rather than forcing a common model for the prediction. Yeah. So with this brief overview, now we'll be looking at the details of each of these. Okay. So first part is the pre-processing, where we start with the raw four-dimensional resting state fMRI data. All this data was used from the HCP dataset, which is the most widely used resting state fMRI dataset. So as we can see, when we look at the raw resting state fMRI data, it's basically a 4D data where it's a sequence of MRIs obtained at different time intervals. So basically, you can visualize that as very similar thing to the video that is captured by the digital cameras, where different images are acquired over the time. So very similar thing happens in the resting state fMRI. We obtain different MRI scans over time and then concatenate those to get the 4D data, where each MRI data is basically a 3D image XYZ, and the fourth dimension is the time. So overall, it becomes a four-dimensional data, which is sequential in nature. And in fact, that sequential part is the part we are trying to exploit explicitly in the proposed method. So the first pre-processing is converting the 4D data into 2D gray ordinated data. So when we talk about 2D, basically the one dimension is time, and the second dimension, the remaining XYZ, the spatial dimensions are compressed into one dimension, where the 3D location is captured in terms of vector indices. So basically, this gray ordinated time series correspond to this 2D data, and the number of gray ordinates are 59,412 in the HCP dataset. And that's why we get these 59,412 different time series. Each one corresponds to a unique gray ordinate in the brain. Okay, before I proceed further, the gray ordinate stands. Okay, means gray ordinate, you can visualize as very similar to what is pixel in the image. So it's very small part of the brain, but because the brain is a 3D structure, the gray ordinate also corresponds to a 3D small volume of the brain. So basically, the brain is divided into 59412 very small 3D volumes, and each of that volume is called as gray ordinate. Yeah. So then each of that is divided into what is called as ROIs, and uh, entire brain is divided into 379 ROIs, but because most of the information lies in the cortical volume, so we are taking only the 360 ROIs, which are the cortical region ROIs. So we are not considering the subcortex region, because the predictions are mainly decided by the cortical fMRI. So we are taking the 360 ROS out of the total 379 ROS. So this forms the pre-processing, which basically gives us the time series, coordinated time series from the cortical region of the brain. So now, as the output of the pre-processing pipeline, we get the coordinated time series, which is basically a multi-dimensional time series consisting of 59412 time series. Then for each of that time series, we are obtaining three different representations like raw time series, first order difference, and the second order difference. The reason why we go for the different representation is that sometimes the raw representation may not get us the required features which are very easily observed through its first order difference or let's say second order difference. So to have the diverse representation, we are considering its three different representation. And then for each of the representation, we are extracting three features which are histogram, catch 22 and summary. Now I'll be explaining in brief what are all these three features. Out of the three features that are mentioned here, the catch 22 and the summary.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, question from Suman Dekhadeep in chat box. Uh, what is the method for in chat box, sir?
Just a minute. Yeah. What? Okay. It's a multimodal parcellation scheme which is already existing method. Uh, is it clear? Maybe I'll be sharing at the end the paper which gives all the details. It's already a published work. So if there are some doubts regarding the specific methods employed here, that can be clear through the paper. Is it fine? Should I proceed further?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah. It's basically multimodal parcellation scheme. The details are mentioned in the paper.
Your slide is not visible. Now visible.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, so from each of the different representation, like raw time series, first order and second order, we are extracting these three different kinds of feature: catch 22, summary, and a proposed histogram based feature. So each of these features, I'll explain or go through in a brief. So out of the three, the catch 22 and summary are the existing widely used features in the time series analysis, where the catch 22 basically stands for the 22 statistically significant features, uh, which includes the information like temporal correlation, entropy, and the distributional metrics. Uh, so, for each of the time series, when we apply the catch 22 as a feature, it generates the vector of 22 different statistical values. Similarly, in the summary feature extractor, for the given time series, it tries to generate the seven different parameters, which are again the statistical parameters like mean, standard deviation, minima, maxima, and different percentiles like 25 percentile, 50, and 75 percentile. So, Catch 22 and summary are basically some sort of statistical representation of the given time series. Uh, so initially we started with these existing methods like catch 22 and summary, and what we observed apart from this, we also tried different time series feature extractors like MR Hydra, DRCI, Rocket, Hydra, Rise. All of these are mentioned here. So some of these, for example, Rocket is the convolution based feature extraction. Hydra is the dictionary-based feature extractor. So like that, we tried multiple feature extractors, but among all, the catch-22 and summary were found to be the optimal among the existing feature extractors. So through this observation, what we inferred is that if the statistical summaries are providing us the essential information in the given application, okay, uh, why not we try to extract or let's say capture the entire distribution of the signal rather than the small set of scalar descriptors. For example, if we look at the summary feature, it is basically extracting the mean, standard deviation, minima, maxima, and some sort of all of this. If we look at the mean, okay, the mean can be easily obtained if we know the entire PDF of the signal, okay, or the entire distribution of the signal. Similarly, standard deviation can be obtained easily if we know again the PDF or the distribution of the signal. So if the summary of the distribution is providing us the essential information, we try to have the further improvement by observing the entire distribution rather than just some of the parameters of those distribution. So, with this idea, we proposed a new histogram based features where basically we take the entire histogram of the signal as a feature rather than extracting some of the parameters from the distribution of the signal, because the histogram is some sort of, you can say, the distribution of the signal. So once we know the histogram, basically we are incorporating all the statistical information from the signal. And the main idea behind this was that it can characterize subtle changes in the signal that may be lost when using the global descriptive measures like, let's say, mean or standard deviation. For example, we can have multiple signals with the same mean or the same standard deviation. So if we are looking only at the mean or the standard deviation, we cannot differentiate between those two signals, which can have the significantly different distribution, but their mean and standard deviation may remain same. So, in such sort of scenarios, capturing the entire distribution may be more useful as compared to features like catch-22 or summary. Another, you can say, limitation of this existing feature is that all of these features are computed over the entire signal length. And typically, the practically occurring signals are not stationary. So if we are looking at, let's say, the mean of the mean of the signal is significantly varying over the different time durations, and that phenomena is not captured when we are trying to extract the existing features like summary. So to overcome that, what we proposed is to extract the histogram features from the smaller windows over which the signal can be assumed to be stationary. Because when we are looking at the distribution or the summary of the statistical information, we typically assume that statistically the signal remains stationary over which the features are computed. So to incorporate that stationarity, we first divided the raw signal into 60 time points, which basically correspond to 43 seconds. Typically, the resting state fMRI signal remains stationary for the duration of 40 to 60 seconds. So with that in mind, we first generated the windows of length 60 time points, which are approximately equal to 43 seconds. And because in that duration the signal is known to remain stationary, from that stationary signal we extracted the histogram beans. So in this particular study, the bean size was said to be 50. So basically, for each window, we'll be having the 50 length vector, and because the total duration of the signal was 1200 time points, the window length of 60 time points basically generated the total of 20 windows, and for each of that 20 window, a 50 length histogram was generated. So this proposed histogram based method eventually resulted in the histogram matrices of size 20 cross 50, where 20 corresponds to the number of windows, 50 corresponds to the number of bins. So now these two-dimensional histogram matrices were then provided as the input to a 2D CNN for the activation map prediction. So this was the proposed histogram based model for the activation map prediction, where the histogram features are computed from the windowed signal, which are then provided to input to a 2D CNN for the prediction purpose. And now coming to the final part in the pipeline, that is actual prediction of the activation values. So once we have extracted different kinds of features, okay, like summary, catch, and histogram. So if we go back here, we had selected three features and we have three different representations of the signal. So in total, we get 3 into 3, that is 9 features. And then each of those 9 feature sets are used as an input to different regressors like lasso, linear regression, SVR, and so on. Okay. So each of those 9 feature sets are provided as input to, let's say, first to lasso, then to linear regressor, SVR, and so on. So each of the feature set using each of the regressor will generate some predicted values, and then we see which predictions are the best, which combination gives us the best prediction. So uh, these are the results. Okay, so here we can see this was a sort of ablation study where we first identified which features should be used in the further analysis. So here we can see catch 22 and summary were the best among the all existing temporal features. Then here comes the part that I just discussed. So for each of the feature set, let's say catch 22 first order, catch 22 second order, catch 22, and so on, we tried different regressors. For example, this first value corresponds to catch 22 applied to lasso regressor. The second value corresponds to catch 22 applied to linear regressor, and so on. So like that, we computed the accuracy of prediction for each feature set and each regressor. Uh, so as we can see, and this exercise was repeated for all the different tasks considered in the present work. So here we considered 7 different tasks like relational, emotion, language, working memory, gambling, and motor. So across different tasks, okay, what we observed was that lasso and the HVR are the best performing regressors, okay, when applied on different feature sets. So as we can see, for all the different tasks, the SVR and the lasso stand out to be the best regressors, okay, and that is summarized here. Among the different existing feature set, uh, this SVR was found to be the optimal for catch 22 summary and its variations. Okay? And lasso was found to be the optimal for the first order catch 22 and the second order catch 22. So all of this was basically done to identify which feature set and regressor pair should be used for the optimal prediction. A similar exercise was done for the proposed histogram features, where we tried the raw histograms, the histograms obtained from the first order difference the histogram features obtained from the second order difference. So here again, consistently across the different contrasts, the second order histogram was found to provide the best prediction accuracies. Okay. But the more interesting fact observed through all these results was that no single feature set exhibited the global superiority across the entire brain. So what this means is that if we are looking at the particular gray ordinate, one set of feature may provide the better result. When we are looking at the another gray ordinate, the different feature set can give the better performance. So basically, this motivated us to go for the ensemble based task activation map prediction, because no single feature set is working optimally over the entire brain. What we suggested is the use of a different feature regressor combination for different gray ordinates, and that basically motivated us to propose the jailbreak model, which stands for the gray ordinated ensemble modeling or regression. So here basically we try to use the best feature regression model for each gray ordinate, which basically integrates the best of the all predictive insights. So this is our jailbreak model. Okay, overall pipeline of the proposed jailbreak model. So till this feature extraction, it's similar to what was shown earlier here. Okay. So using all 9 feature sets, okay, we try to predict the activation map values. Okay, and the additional thing that we do here is that we compare the predictions obtained through all the 9 feature regressor combinations. Okay, and then we compare for the given gray ordinate which feature regressor combination is providing the best accuracy in terms of correlation. Okay, so that part basically improves the overall prediction performance, because now we are going for the optimal feature regressor combination for every gray ordinate rather than forcing a given feature regressor for the entire brain parcel or the entire brain cortex. Okay. So once the prediction for every gray ordinate is improved, the overall prediction accuracy is also obviously improved. So this is the time series based jailbreak. Further, to improve the performance of the jailbreak, we incorporate the additional spatial features which are the functional connectivity maps used in the existing literature. So rather than just restricting ourselves to the temporal features, we also concatenate the spatial features used by the existing methods, which are the heuristically derived functional connectivity maps. So we concatenate the temporal features with the functional connectivity maps feature, and then again repeat the same exercise. Okay. We generate the 9 spatio-temporal feature sets, then see their prediction performance, and then observe which spatio-temporal feature set works best for the given gray ordinate, and then select that particular set for a given gray ordinate. And this is repeated for all the 59412 gray ordinates. This is the algorithm of jailbreak, okay? Pseudo code kind of thing. But all this is explained in this figure also. This is the mathematical representation of what we have explained in the figure. Now, when it comes to the last part of the jailbreak, okay, when we want to select or decide which feature set is working best for the given coordinate prediction, okay, the prediction accuracy can be obtained using different measures, like let's say mean square error, mean absolute error, the R value or the R square value, and so on. So initially, we do not know which among these different comparison matrix will result in the overall superior prediction. So to decide that, we tried different matrix like MAC, MAE, R2 and R. Okay? And this was done for all the 7 contrasts that we considered in the present analysis. What was observed is that the mean square error works best to produce the overall highest accuracy in the activation map prediction. So when we say here the best prediction for each coordinate, we basically imply that the prediction has the lowest value of mean square error. So this was also an ablation study to obtain the best error metric, which was found to be mean square error. So all these pairs were obtained for which the MAC was found to be minimal. So now, as expected, uh, when we compare the performance of the jailbreak or the ensemble model, okay, with the single feature set based model, okay, we obtained the significant improvement. For example, the best performing uh, single global feature set produced the correlation of 0.712, 0.5932, and so on different contrast, whereas the ensemble based jailbreak model consistently outperformed the best performing single feature set model, okay, to have the accuracies of 0.725, 0.608, and so on. Okay. So even if we compare with the best of the individual feature sets, the jailbreak always performs better, and basically this verifies our idea of combining different feature insights to produce the overall higher accuracy. And this is the uh, final correlation die-score and the AUC between the actual and the predicted activation maps using the proposed jailbreak. So as we can see, for most of the contrast, the accuracy, the correlation is quite high, ranging in 0.72, 0.60, 0.4973, and so on. Okay, the predictions are poor for one particular task, which is gambling, and this is observed in all the existing methods as well. We'll discuss about this particular task in detail later. Okay. Uh, Now this distribution, okay, shows that which feature work best, okay, for the given task. For example, if we look at the uh, first row, that stands for the emotion contrast, and now we can see how many gray ordinates are best predicted using histogram, first order histogram, second order histogram, and so on. So now we can see that for a given task contrast, different feature sets, okay, are predicting based for the given number of coordinates, and that number is evenly distributed across the brain cortex. For example, here this 7405 are the number of coordinates which are best predicted by the histogram. 6558 are the number of coordinates best predicted by first order histogram, and so on. So basically, this gives us the clearer idea that how using the different feature sets helps us in improving the overall predictions. And these are the visual depictions of the actual activation map versus the predicted activation maps. This first slide shows the results for relational prediction. So as we can see, the upper one is the true activation map, the lower one is the predicted, and the upper and the lower predictions are quite similar. Okay. Similarly, for social also, the predicted and the the true activations and the predicted activations are again quite similar. So basically, this fact is also reflected in their high correlation values of 0.725 and 0.728. Okay. So this is the visual representation of the same thing. So basically, it implies that the predictions are based if we are looking at the relational task and the social task. Now coming to the working memory. Okay. Now compared to the earlier task, the predictions are not as accurate as can be observed through the true versus predicted activation maps. Okay. It differs at some region. Okay. Same thing is observed for the emotion task. Okay. However, it still captures most of the uh, pattern in the original activation map. Okay. And that fact is reflected in comparatively lower R value, okay, which is 0.668 and 0.61. Now, coming to the remaining tasks like language, motor, and gambling. Okay. The worst performance is seen for the gambling task, where we can see that when we compare the predicted activation maps with the true activation maps, they are significantly differing. Okay. And that is reflected in the lower correlation value of 0.18. Okay. But the reason for that inferior performance lies in the uh, task itself, because when we are looking at the gambling task, the gambling phenomena is typically too much of a subjective phenomena. For example, how I think when I'm gambling will significantly differ from, let's say, when you are thinking of a gambling or some other person is thinking of gambling. So, because of the intrinsic nature of the task itself, none of the existing model also is accurately predicting the activation map when it comes to the gambling task, because the task itself is too subjective. And in fact, this correlation of 0.184 is the highest correlation, okay, when we compare this with the existing method. So although the correlation is not as expected, it's still the best among all the existing methods. And the reason lies in the physical phenomena of gambling task itself. Now these are the results, subject-wise results. Okay, there were total 68 test subject, and these are the correlation values obtained for different subjects across different task contrasts. So the red one indicates the better predictions, while the blue one indicates the poorer predictions. And as we can see, the for some of the tasks like relational and social, the accuracies are better, but when it comes to gambling, the accuracies are poorer. The same thing is observed across different parameters like AUC, dice coefficient. Okay. So the results remain consistent irrespective of which parameter we are observing, whether it's correlation, AUC, or dice. So, in summary, uh, okay, what we observed that across the results remain consistent even if we look at it subject specific. For example, for all the subjects, the relational predictions are above almost zero point 0.6, okay, indicating the better prediction performance. But if we look at the gambling task, the predictions are consistently poor. Okay. So the overall result and the subject specific results are matching, okay, which basically gives us a way to apply this prediction for the individual subject. Okay. So So this analysis basically verifies the robust generalization across subjects, okay, and also gives us the idea how changing or observing the different tasks, okay, uh, affects the prediction accuracies. Okay. Uh, so now all of this analysis was done without considering any explicit noise into consideration. But when it comes to practical signal acquisition, as explained earlier, okay, because a subject can have some human error during the task performance, the head motion noise comes into the picture, and to quantify or to observe the effect of how the head motion related noise can degrade the performance, we purposefully conducted the analysis across two groups. The first group was having the low head motion, while the second group was purposefully selected, which has the high head motion. Basically, head motion gives rise to the noise in the fMRI signal generation. So now, as expected, the blue one is corresponding to low head motion, the red one is the high head motion. When we compare the average prediction accuracies, the accuracy is slightly dropped when the head motion is increased, and it is expected because with the head motion the noise comes into the picture, and when the signal is noisy, the prediction are expected to be poorer. But the interesting fact is that the drop in the correlation value is very small. So the highest drop observed is of 0.03, okay, which again signifies the robustness of our proposed algorithm, JBREC algorithm, because even for the noisy resting state fMRI, the correlation accuracy is not dropped significantly. The average drop in correlation comes out to be around 0.02. Okay. So this basically gives the effect of signal quality on the prediction performance, and also verifies the robustness and applicability of the proposed model for the practical resting state fMRI signals, which are often noisy. Uh, then to have the cross dataset generalization, okay, our entire models till now were trained on the HCP dataset. Now to observe how the model behaves for the completely unknown data, we tested the performance of the proposed JBREC on the entirely new data, that is HCP data, and these are the results obtained on that entirely new data set. Again, here we can see the performance remains almost close to what was observed on the HCP dataset. So basically, this again verifies the robustness of the proposed model to out of sample predictions. Okay. Again, here the significant drop was observed for the gambling task, and the reason remains same because the gambling phenomena itself is too subjective. The predictions based on the gambling pattern of the remaining subject may not help to predict us how the unknown subject will do the gambling task. But the key observation is that apart from the gambling, for all the remaining contrasts, the prediction almost remains to the same level as it was for the original HCP subject. Now, finally, we compare the prediction accuracy of the proposed models with the existing methods. So, here the P1, P2, P3, the blue, red and the green correspond to the proposed histogram based model, the proposed jailbreak model and the proposed spatio-temporal jailbreak respectively. Okay. And the yellow, gray and the light gray correspond to the existing methods. Now through the correlation values, average correlation value across different task contrasts, we can easily observe that the green one, that is spatio-temporal jailbreak, outperforms all the existing as well as the proposed models which are histogram based and temporal jailbreak. And even the proposed histogram based model itself is outperforming the existing all methods. But when we compare among the P1, P2, P3, as expected, the jailbreak is performing better than the sole histogram based model, whereas the spatio-temporal jailbreak is even outperforming the temporal jailbreak, which basically improves the prediction accuracy by combining or incorporating the spatial features as well. So here we can see for the gambling task, although our accuracy was around 0.18, the existing accuracies were in the range of 0.1. So this is the summary or conclusion of what we discussed for last few minutes, last almost 1.5 hours. So here we basically presented a novel framework for task activation map prediction from the resting state fMRI itself, where for the first time we formulated the problem as a time series regression problems. Further, we proposed a novel histogram based method for the time series regression, and we also verified its applicability in the proposed problem. Further, we propose the gray specific modeling for the prediction of activation map, which basically gives the advantage over the one fit all approach. Okay, by selecting the optimal predictor for a given gray ordinate. Okay, so the overall accuracy of the prediction is improved. Then once we have the coordinate specific predictors, we try out different predictions. We try out different predictors using the different features and the regressor combination. And in the proposed ensemble based jailbreak, the jailbreak tries to combine the best predictor for the given coordinate. Okay? Uh, which uh, which resulted in the better accuracy as compared to any single feature set based predictors, because it basically is combining the best among the different feature regressor combination. Okay, so the overall accuracy is improved as compared to single feature regressor results. So this another advantage we can say is that because in the entire pipeline we never used any deep learning based features or the regressors. Okay, so the data requirement is typically small as compared to let's say we go for the transformer or LSTM or RNN based model. Okay, so although those are also the probable potential candidates for the time series modeling, we have gone with the comparatively simpler features and the regressors, because the data set is typically the size of the data set is the practical constraint in such kind of studies. Okay? So when working with the limited data set, the traditional feature extraction and standard regressors are known to perform better with the small size training data. So this is another advantage of the proposed model. So now coming to the future scope, okay. So in this entire pipeline, we have gone with the univariate time series regression framework, okay, which considers only the given coordinate time series to predict its activation map value, whereas typically, the neighboring coordinates can also give us some information about the activation map value of the given coordinate. So, if we want to also incorporate the neighboring regions information, we can explore the multivariate time series regression model instead of just the univariate regression framework. So this is one direction in which we can extend this work. The second is what I just mentioned, that here we have not explored the deep learning framework like RNNs or temporal CNNs, which are typically used for the sequential data analysis. So those also can be explored. Then more recent state-of-the-art methods like transformers or attention-based models, okay, which are known to work better in the long-range dependencies, can also be explored. Okay. And finally, because here we are basically trying to generate the activation maps, the generative models like GANs or diffusion or variational autoencoders, all of these frameworks can also be explored, okay, to see whether these generative models can improve the task activation map generation. Okay, because the process intrinsically is the generation process. So intuitively, all the generative models can improve the accuracy further. So this possibility can also be explored. In fact, some of this work we are doing right now. So the results seems to be promising with the generative models. Okay. So there is significant improvement. We when we combined the GEMBREAK with the generative models, okay, but the entire analysis is not complete, so I have not included that in the present. And this work is published recently as a journal article, okay, in Frontiers in Neuroscience, with title as Jailbreak, a spatiotemporal coordinate ensemble modeling framework for predicting task activation maps from resting state fMRI. So this is recently published in Frontiers in Neuroscience. This is a part of my student's PhD work, Shashili. So thank you all for patiently listening, and uh, now we can go for the interaction. If you have some doubts, questions, or anything that you would like to ask, it's open for you now. I would be happy to answer any queries from your side. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So if you have any queries or want to discuss anything related to this, we can have it right now. Yeah. I think there is a question from Bharti Dikshit. Which tools you have used for experimentation or guidelines in general? So, the tools means, can you elaborate what do you exactly mean by tools? Are you talking about the coding platform or what? I think if you can unmute, you can directly ask. It would be convenient for you if you can unmute and ask. Okay.
This FDP participant cannot be unmuted.
Okay, okay, fine, fine. So I'll write. I think they can hear, but they cannot speak. Is it like that? Yeah. Are there any other questions? Please feel free to ask if you have any questions or want to discuss anything.